Starting off with the first one, I chose religion as the first institution. Religion is deeply influential in societal structure because it provides people with moral authority. It's part of cultural traditions and gives framework for identities. Historically, the majority of religious organizations have defined gender in binary ways, being male and female as part of their creator's design. With this belief system, many religious groups view transgender identities as incompatible with their religion and text. Religion also affects family life, education, and politics, which has an effect on the transgender rights and gender affirming care. We see in the text of Cannon and Clymer, it was CC6, the textbook discusses how the patriarchy is the structural system that reinforced male dominance socially, politically, and economically. Institutions, including religion, maintain these hierarchies that privilege men and keep women inferior in comparison. Marxist feminism is discussed, and it highlights how the patriarchy relates to economic and social systems, which is discussed that is the reason for upon women's unpaid labor and maintenance of traditional family structures and homemaking tasks is what kept men successful in order to sustain the workforce. Religion reinforces the systems by identifying these binary gender roles as sacred and natural according to their religion. Anything outside of the binary is considered unacceptable or even sinful. We see in Lynn and Levine, CC5, in the text we see that the level of oppression put on to gender is affected by race, class, sexuality, and other identities, which is crucial information, meaning that for trans people, especially trans women of color, face multiple levels of exclusion when religion frames them as defiant. It's Lynn and Caputo Levine, yes. We see that through Marxist conflict lens institutions serve ruling class interests and criminalize and stigmatize marginalized groups in order to maintain power. Religion fits into this framework because it can act as a mechanism of social control, therefore shaping laws and norms that preserve natural hierarchies. And then Smithy and Ramirez in CC9 discuss that ideologies like good mothering are institutionalized to privilege certain gender roles by punishing those who cannot conform to the expectations that fit within their gender role. In a religious standpoint, it's also saying that women's roles are to be nurturers, which excludes transgender people from these categories, which therefore religion also creates this image that nonconformity is the moral failure on top of the already placed stigma of not fitting within the gendered expectations. My personal example was I've attended church sermons with friends or going to hear for myself what was being spoken some of the time in college. I grew up very religious when I was younger, but as I gotten older, my ideology has changed with some beliefs and the religion I was raised on. I've encountered a couple of sermons discussing bathroom policies, transgender people, and the connotations of how religious leaders and speakers would talk about transgender people simply because they didn't understand something outside of their belief system or what they were taught. I realized these weren't just sermons, but political and social conversations from people and community where power has affected regular people's daily livelihood. In some cases, it's the corrupt, close ties of the community and political leaders and those with money and privilege to keep these ideas in place. And other times, it's just people being taught what's right and wrong based on the religion and the place of worship they attend and simply the belief system, which is seen as deviant, where the religious bylaws aren't met. For the second one, I chose media as my second institution. Media is one of the most powerful institutions in modern society because it shapes public opinion, is in control of representation, and portrays narratives about social issues. There's many different forms where people get their media content, whether it's news outlets, television, films, or social media. The media creates this biased narrative of what is being told about the particular topic, usually in debates over transgender rights, and headlines usually say things like controversial or debate, which normalize exclusion and reinforce these gender norms. In Cannon and Clymer, it's shown that patriarchy is rooted in cultural narratives, not just institutions like the familiar household or politics. There's also discussion about how ideologies such as toxic masculinity, incel culture, and red pill ideology from the Matrix, which contributes to the narrative of women as the source of social problems for men. When transgender people are featured in the media, it's usually in regard to conflict, controversy, or threat rather than it being normalized in just everyday human experience. Furthermore, feminist perspectives for the critique of how media maintains these binaries such as male and female, or within norms versus deviant. reinforcing these hierarchies. In relation to conflict theory, it highlights that the media is not neutral and serves the interest of the dominant group by controlling which ideology is where the bias comes in. They're able to frame whatever narrative they want on transgender people, whether it's an access to healthcare, a problem to be debated, sports, whatever the case may be. It's centered around cisgender concerns rather than by giving a voice to transgender people, reinforcing its inequality. In Lana Caputo Levine, transgender people are seen as problems that can be solved to other people, creating a false narrative that reinstates fear and uncertainty to other groups. The example I put in society is the transgender swimmer Leah Thomas. Media coverage has portraying her as a threat to women's sports. They cover news stories that focused on public opinions and thoughts and perceived threats and differing opinions rather than getting her perspective or even athletic rules. It was intended to get commotion and circulating conflict rather than insightful discussion or informative news.